I'm genuinely excited that you asked this question because it gives me the opportunity to expound upon this concept a little bit. So I want to start on the front end by acknowledging that the social construct of whiteness here in America is real and that there are inherent benefits to being born white in a country that has its origins rooted in white supremacy. That said, I've been able to disassociate myself from the identity of whiteness in that I do not derive any of my personal identity from the fact that my skin lacks melanin. I want to be explicitly clear when I state that whiteness is not real and that whiteness only exists in the presence of blackness or in the presence of other communities of color. One of the things that I observed growing up in an all-white community is that there is no meaningful solidarity around whiteness. When I look back across my childhood and I examine the times that my family was going through hardship and I identify the people who were in a position to help us but ultimately chose not to, or in some circumstances deliberately went out of their way to make our lives more difficult, what I find is that it's exclusively old white people. What I found in these instances is that even though they were white and we were white, that whiteness did not provide any sense of connection to the point where they felt obligated to help us. And that's what you'll find anytime that everybody in the room is white, that whiteness does not provide a strong enough connection to overrule any of their individual self-interests. Clearly, the identity of whiteness has some appeal, some allure. If you don't believe me, go ask Enrique Tarrio. In fact, the only time that you'll see that whiteness has a meaningful binding effect is when people gather together for the express purpose of celebrating said whiteness. Now, these are all observations that I've taken from my personal life experience, but we can also pull from historical evidence examples that show that whiteness is a contrivance. As Theodore Allen points out in his book, The Invention of the White Race, whenever the first Africans showed up at Jamestown in 1619, there were no white people whenever they showed up. In fact, the word white wouldn't show up in colonial records for another 60 years. At that time in history, there were English, Irish, French, German, Austrian, Russian, Prussian. They were a nationality. They never referred to themselves as white. It wasn't until 1680 that the concept of whiteness became prevalent in the cultural lexicon, and that's a direct result of the colony of Virginia legislating whiteness into existence in response to Bacon's Rebellion, which was a labor uprising comprised of an alliance of European indentured servants and African indentured servants and slaves. The ruling class of Virginia was incredibly concerned about this alliance, and it culminated in the Slave Codes of 1705, which created a social separation between Europeans and Africans. It ensured that Europeans could never be subjected to lifetime servitude, and it ensured that African slaves could never be free. The social separation was deliberately created by the aristocracy to ensure that they wouldn't have to contend with future labor uprisings, and it's existed in some form or fashion ever since. So once you've examined all of this and you've identified that whiteness isn't real and that it's always existed as a barrier to class solidarity, it becomes incredibly easy to separate yourself from the identity of whiteness. I appreciate y'all taking the time. Have a good one.